Welcome to Innovation Day 2023, presented by Connect. We've got such an incredible array of things happening here, supporting the life sci and tech communities in San Diego.
The great thing about living in 2023 is we all have Google now. We all have them on our phones. You're all sitting there. So we're not going to be going into reading long lists of bios because you can look at them a lot quicker. But just so you can orient who's on the panel, we'll make sure to kind of give a brief introduction so you can see everyone. Of course, immediately to my right is Pelin. You already know about her. We've got David Dinks from UCSD. What I love about David is he's a professor of data science and philosophy. I've never heard that before. I really love it. I now want to adopt part of that in my title, for what we do, because I think we need more philosophers, particularly with regards to innovation. We've got Robert Twomey, a close friend and colleague, who really works at this intersection of arts and AI. And you're going to understand, why is it really important that we include arts in this when we think our brains often go to just traditional engineering and science. And then on our far right, we have Yuzu, who's going to talk about one of the important NSF-funded centers that we have at UCSD. She's also a professor in our Data Science Institute at UCSD. And she also runs the National Science Foundation Center for AI called TELOS, which focuses on learning-enabled optimization, which, of course, I'm going to start the conversation there because I'm really curious. What exactly is learning-enabled optimization?
Well, first, optimization actually is really universal, okay? It's basically when you have limited resource, you want to solve some problem. Within those limited resources, you want to do it best, okay? So now, with the scale and the complexity of a lot of large engineered systems, say in the chip design, you have so many steps, and how do we fit even more circuits into a smaller region on your chip with even less energy, okay? So what happens is that all of the steps require optimization problem, and the scale has become so skyrocketing that we cannot handle it using traditional methods anymore. The idea is that to use the power of AI and the data to help us to tame the complexity of optimization. Yeah.
Okay, and now that we come to a question for Robert. Of course, AI exploded into our consciousness last fall when GPT was let out into the wild and we all became accustomed to it, and yet AI has been around for a while. But the thing I was curious about is that some of the earliest applications from the kind of social and societal aspects have been in art. And so what, first of all, why do you think that that's happened, and what kind of we learn about this intersection of art and AI?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, at UC San Diego, Harold Cohen, a professor of visual art, was writing Lisp programs back in the late 70s to model his painting practice, and spent the duration of his career building what was basically like an external embodiment of his particular approach to producing artwork. I think in the history of art engineering collaborations, I think Nokia Bell Labs experiments in art and technology, these kinds of programs, I think we do look to the arts for creative use of emerging technologies in a way that sort of centers human experience. I think artists have, since the invention of oil paint, have engaged with emerging technologies. I think we're in a really strange time. I noticed I think in Rob Knight's talk, maybe there were a few text-to-image generated images. I think we're seeing a shift in some kinds of creative work that can be automated, and that I think that requires us to reconsider sort of what are the essential qualities of human creative practice.
Can I say something there? At TED just a few months ago, art and AI were like everything, right? And we listened to an incredible song by an amazing known singer. Then we found out it was actually AI generated, and it was not her voice, it was her digital twin. And we were all flabbergasted. So what do you think about that?
I think, worry about your royalties. Update your licensing agreement. Yeah, I hope that this results in like a amplification and proliferation of kind of creative explorations that people can do. I think there's a real democratization of creative practice that comes from being able to like author images or video, music from text.
And we'll get to that in a moment because I'm really curious about kind of what the role of AI and this intersection of arts has to do with authorship and how we're going to control what historically we call intellectual property around that. But I wanted to go to David next, in that you know, it's one thing to have applications and to put, you know, AI out into the world, but we also have to do it responsibly in a way that gives us a certain amount of safety and ethic. So David's work has to do not only with designing a lot of these protocols, but also designing the research itself and collaborating on the research. And you're part of a roundtable or a panel on AI.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think sometimes people get surprised at the pairing of the words ethical and AI, because the thought is AI is just math, it's just code, it's just the ones and zeros, it's just optimization. But actually, as we've talked about before as being colleagues, you have to know what you're optimizing. So are you optimizing for things that people like and will pay money for? Are you optimizing for profit? Are you optimizing for consumer engagement? Are you optimizing for people's learning if you're running a social networking service? And what you choose to optimize isn't dictated by the math. The math only kicks in once you know what you're trying to achieve. And so we already have ethical issues that arise when we're thinking about how we want to build AI systems. What do we want to have them be capable of doing? What do we want to have be success for AI systems? And so one of the things that we work on is how can we have better methods that can be used, whether by students in projects, in startup organizations, in massive companies, or even in, I think what you're referring to is I'm lucky enough to serve on the National AI Advisory Committee. And so trying to advise the executive branch of the US government on how they can ensure that their uses of AI technology are trustworthy and support the American people. And so it's really a matter of taking ethical notions, which people think of as very high in the clouds. Maybe it's what you think of as in college you talked about it after midnight in the dorm room, and grounding it in the everyday practices of people building these systems.
I love that. And Pelin, you know, you have an actively running company out in the world. How much thought do you give to this stuff, and how do you incorporate some of these very concepts that David is talking about?
No, and it's funny. We've been an AI-driven health tech company since day one, and all of a sudden right now people are thinking we're using that term to be hip, and we've been using it from day one. So that alone is kind of interesting. And AI is not just ChatGPT, obviously, even though that's what everybody is thinking about. We use that too, but we really, going back to what Rob was talking about, we collect a lot of data from people, from everything from biomarkers to getting their PRO data back, and eventually getting wearable data. And we're doing machine learning across all these dimensions to really get to precision medicine. That's a great way of doing it. And I don't know what happened, but I can be loud. That's what Rob was talking about in terms of the microbiome innovation area. So there are a lot of ways to use it, and I do agree on the purpose. And also remember, it is a tool, and it's going to incorporate our biases, and that's a really, really important thing for us to realize. It is what we make it, and it incorporates our biases. That's why there's some really interesting answers in ChatGPT, because it got those answers from all of us, and we all have biases.
So very often when we have new emergent technology that represents an entire paradigm shift, the technology operating systems advance faster than our own human operating systems do. How do we kind of get those a little bit closer together? Do we, as some people have called for, slowing down research and somehow putting safeguards and guardrails in the process? Or is there something else we can be doing to make sure our human operating systems at least understand some of the downstream consequences and can be able to deal with that as we do it? I'm not sure who wants to kind of take that question. David.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think, our human operating systems are moved very slowly. There are a lot of calls right now for regulation in DC. I am pessimistic that the Senate and House are going to move quickly to regulate AI. I think Sam Altman keeps going to DC saying, please regulate us. And I keep thinking, oh, so you want to delay things for 5 years. But what we really need to recognize is the roles that we can play, either as consumers or as people in these companies. to be intentional about the systems we're building, about what we want them to achieve, and how we deploy and use them out in the world. We often, I think, talk about AI as though it's, to be timely from a few weeks ago, as though it's a hurricane or a tropical storm bearing down on us, and all we can do is, pull all the furniture in and hope that it passes without damaging us. But I think we need to realize AI is created by us. It is created by humans. We are the ones deciding to build it. We are the ones deciding to deploy it. And so the biggest thing that our human operating systems need to do is upgrade to being intentional about the kinds of systems we build, deploy, and interact with.
And how do we do that? And Yuzu, I think you've got some work in that area too.
Well, I just want to first follow up with what David just said. I totally agree. And I think that, both as an AI researcher or everybody, I think we should stay very open-minded, inquisitive, but also maintaining the critical thinking and not take things at the face value. But at the same time, I want to make another point, which is that I don't think research should ever be slowed down. Because especially, with this new development of AI, we heard a lot about important issues of AI safety, responsible AI, and all of this are all super important. But I think that now developing a deep and fundamental understanding of a lot of the AI models, especially the large language models, actually become even more important than ever. Okay, there are many reasons for that. And for one, I think this is in some sense necessary or even prerequisite if we want to truly ultimately be able to address the AI safety issue. And then the other is that it's not even clear that what we've seen, transformers and the diffusion model, it's not even clear this are necessarily the best architecture. And we want to do better. You want to have an even simpler model, generalize better, we have to have a better understanding. I think these are some of the directions that are made more prominent by the current development of AI.
Yeah, I would add one point to this discussion, which I think also just has to do with the idea of literacy and promoting an AI literacy, algorithmic literacy, information literacy that I think also skeptical about the potential for government regulation. But I think the more that people are able to get hands-on, how many people in the room have used ChatGPT? The more people that can get hands-on and start to form opinions of it, I think there's a real project in cultivating a literacy in a broad public about what data goes into these models, what exactly you're interacting with when you interact with them, that can impact these other aspects.
I'll definitely double down on what my colleague said here. This was yet another big conversation at TED, and to me, at the end of the day, we should not stop research or slow down research. And the other part is, I also don't think government regulation is going to come anytime soon. But a lot of the ethical questions and deepfakes and all this stuff is also coming from the not so good players. They're never going to stop. So for us to stop the good stuff while the rest of it is moving very quickly also puts the good guys at a disadvantage. So that was, again, a big topic that we discussed at TED. So I want to bring that up because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is good already. Yes, we may need guardrails, but there's a lot of also not so good use of AI, and that is proceeding. So I think we all need to move as fast as we can with thought, but knowing that there are not so good players out there.
Now, I'm going to ask the next question, but while I'm doing it, please also we want this to be interactive, so after this question, we'd like you guys to be asking questions of the panel as well. If you do, just raise your hand, and we'll call on you. So let's make this a group conversation if possible. But Robert, we talked early on about this concept of authorship and about how is AI going to change this whole notion of original work and provenance of good ideas.
Yeah, that's great. Theorist Walter Benjamin wrote an essay called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction that talked about the aura of the handmade and how things like printing presses and photography displaced that. I think the question for me is sort of, I do think that these sorts of tools shift authorship, creative authorship in an unprecedented way. I think the question for me is, what are you interacting with when you interact with the model? Where's the creative agency coming from? If you're eliciting something from ChatGPT, it's really like a mashup of multiple kind of human actors, to center it in the human. That there's an engineer, computer scientist that built the system that embeds some values, some methods. There's the thousands or millions of anonymous human authors who contributed data that the system's trained on. and there's your kind of intent or agency as the person who's like soliciting or eliciting something from a model. So I think this is a pretty sort of shifted kind of multi-subjective conjunction of authors, when you're generating something like a text or an image.
Does anyone want to jump in?
Well, I think one of the things that we've quickly seen is how ill-prepared current law is, not just in the US, but worldwide, to deal with the advances we're seeing in AI. We're sort of, it's all the things that happened with data 30 years ago, where we quickly had to sort of reinvent the law on the fly to accommodate the fact that we can do things back then with data, now with generative AI systems, that always seem to be the province of the human. And so I think we, in a certain sense, need to kind of buckle in. It is, as you said, it was last fall. I sometimes have to remind people that ChatGPT is less than a year in the public eye. This is not something that came out 10 years ago and we still haven't figured it out. Now, people knew about large language models prior to ChatGPT, but it was held within the small community of tech experts. And so I think we need to recognize these are not issues that are going to get resolved quickly. And so we need to be active players in their resolution.
There's also the Web3 element coming up, which really is trying to deal with some of the intellectual property elements, because the current web does not actually have the mechanisms to take care of that. So there are lots of different things happening at the same time, so we can move forward across some of these areas.
Absolutely. This will be a question for everyone, but I'd like to start with you, Zu. What are some of the big unanswered questions currently that you guys are pursuing that you think if we can kind of either get the answers to them or crack those, it'll really kind of make a big change?
Well, regarding the large language models, that would have to be, a lot of this would be speculations. But maybe let me ground my answers still to AI, the relation between AI and optimization, because that's also what I'm interested in and also what our TILO Center is about. I think, as I mentioned earlier, one thing is actually the foundational understanding. So as I mentioned earlier, optimization is actually not just optimizing the chip design and so on, it's also an important part of the AI itself, okay? So the training process essentially is an optimization process, okay? So now one particularly interesting thing about about the large language model is that, well, actually I'm going to point out the two interesting things about number one is that prior to the large language models, we tend to develop a specific model for a specific task. Okay. Now, ChatGPT in some sense is a universal model, yet can be used for many tasks. Okay. And you can now really open up our mind and ask that, can such principle also be used, applied to solve optimization problem, which of course by nature is very different from a lot of the questions answered by the large language models. Okay. On the other hand, another thing with a large language model is that it's re-emphasized the importance of data to us. Data science has been there for a while, and we all know the power of data. However, now it's really remarkable to see that you're just taking language data without much insight, yet structure and insights emerge, even some ability of reasoning, including some algorithmic reasoning and generalization. Okay, so they involved a lot of deep questions for us. Why is maybe there's a structure in data itself, and maybe why is the optimization so effective with that? Okay, how can we model that? I think all of this are some of the really big questions, and some of our team members at TILOS are also actively getting involved in that. Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in? What are some of the big kind of unanswered questions that you're pursuing?
So I think one of the big questions on the technical side, I know I've been talking about ethics and regulation, but on the technical side is, GPT-4, ChatGPT, the transformer models, but also all the other AI systems, they don't think about the world in the ways that we do. They don't use human concepts. They don't recognize human sorts of things. That's why you can get GPT-4 to make all kinds of dumb mistakes, because it doesn't actually know what words mean. It just knows how sequences of characters get strung together stereotypically in the corpora that it's looked at. And so I think one of the big innovations is we still don't know how to take human thinking, which is kind of symbolic, kind of not, and represent it in computational systems. People have been trying to figure this out in psychology and cognitive science since roughly 1860, and we still don't have it figured out. So I think that And we haven't gotten there with AI. Just throwing more data at the problem isn't going to solve it. We're already seeing incredible diminishing returns with GPT 4.5 and what is starting to emerge about the upcoming GPT 5, despite OpenAI probably spending over $1 billion with a B dollars to produce GPT 5. It's not looking like it's going to be that much better than GPT 4. And so, we're running into the world of, okay, this was a big leap forward, but it still didn't get us all the way to human intelligence. There's still something going on in these, the gray squishy bits that they can grow in space now, that is, we don't know how to capture in machines. And I think that still is the kind of holy grail for all of us who got into AI because of thinking about it as true intelligence.
I love that. And we did have a question from the audience. Maya had a question.
So you mentioned that government's not quite there to regulate AI, and also there are these bad actors out there that are using it. So if you were to regulate AI, what would you do? If you had a magic wand right now and you could actually implement policies or regulations, what would be at the top of your list?
So for me, what would be at the top of the list is actually an expansion of the regulation that already exists. So sometimes people will claim that there is no regulation of AI. That's actually not true. There's a growing amount of regulation. It just doesn't look like it. So for example, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EOC, who does hiring discrimination in the United States, they came out last December and said, we're going to investigate you whether you use AI or not. So you want to use AI to discriminate? We don't care. We're still going to investigate you. It's not a get out of jail free card. We're seeing the same thing happen in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, in the FDA, in the SEC. So in all of the spaces that we already think of as regulated, people have very quickly figured out how to regulate AI in that space. So the magic wand is to have regulation that covers all the rest of life. Because so many things where AI is being used are actually not regulated. And so I don't think that we need to create a single regulatory body for all of AI. But I do think that we need to recognize that AI is changing parts of life that we previously haven't thought needed regulation. We don't think ordinary conversation needs to be regulated, but when you add AI to social media, it does. And so I think the challenge is, how do we get regulation in those sectors and domains that currently we've never thought needed much in the way of regulation?
Tyler's got a question, but I had a question for you, Pelin. If you jump out 5 years, what does success at Radicle Sciences look like in a commercial enterprise 5 years from now? What does that look like if you take out all the fiscal conversations?
I can't talk.
Oh, you don't.
She's been silenced.
She can't talk.
I can talk, but you can't hear me. So to me, back to, we have so much data, and it's coming in all forms, from structured to unstructured. The only way for us to get to precision medicine the way I'd love to see it, and I don't mean just based on genome, but behavioral elements and all kinds of other things. Life is dynamic. It's not like this is who we are. Everything changes. We just talked about our microbiome changing. For us to be able to get to precision medicine, we need data from all sources, and we need AI to be able to actually make sense out of it. I know it can do that. It's going to get better at it. So to me, success is getting to precision medicine at a dynamic level. So it's not like this is who you are, keep at it. Things are going to change. I'm going to get older. My microbiome is going to change. So all of these things, I want to know what optimum health is at every stage for each and every one of us, for both healthcare and sick care. So we need it for both, for healthy people who have issues here and there, as well as people who actually have chronic conditions. That's my ultimate goal.
I love that. How are we doing with time?
Ask Alice.
Alice, how are we doing with time? 5 minutes, okay.
Right.
Thanks, Greg. Quick question for all of you. We didn't talk a lot about bad actors, but obviously that's where a lot of the risk is. So are the geniuses in the labs looking at tools that will help us discern whether what we're seeing is real or fake?
Who wants to take that on
You
first?
want to take it, or you want me to?
Because I think you're all qualified to speak to that.
The short version is, yeah, a lot of people are worrying a lot about that, both detection and prevention. Right now, so you mentioned whether what we see is fake or real. Right now, even the very best deep fakes, these technologies that can generate synthetic things, detectors can still detect that they are artificial with a very high accuracy. The problem is it can take 10 to 15 minutes to do it. And in 10 to 15 minutes, a lie can spread around the world many, many times over. And so right now, the barriers, I think, are increasingly also social. How do we get people to think critically? How do we get people to pause and wait 5 minutes before clicking forward on something? That specifically is on the generative side. More generally, I think we're realizing that the way to beat a lot of AI systems is with AI. And so we're seeing a rapid growth in the use of AI systems to protect, not just attack, for example, in cybersecurity domains. And it's a really exciting area of research.
I can just add that clearly this is a very active research area as well. I personally don't work in that area, but for example, I mean, you start to see a lot of interest nowadays in watermarking. I mean, this watermark can be just in the standard art images you produce, even in things like chips that people are starting to talk about. You know, we spend so much effort and energy to design this chip that I want to also have this IP protected. So definitely very active. On the other hand, I mean, technology develops so fast, and it's not an easy battle. I think it's important that everyone has to be also very well educated, very well be aware of that. So for example, I just want to point out that in UC San Diego, for example, in data science program, all of the master and the PhD students are required to take courses on fairness, ethics, and so on, privacy issues, to make them, like the general public, aware of the importance as well.
So I think we have time for one more question. The question is way out there, so if you could really kind of speak up.
So we have it right now, unless you use anything that is ambiguous or idiomatic to the language, which is to say, unless you use language. And the problem is, yeah, so if it's straightforward things like, say, a guidebook in a church, an audio guide, we can do that now. I mean, that's not hard, and that's a pretty well-solved problem. The challenge comes in things like, suppose that, how do you translate sarcasm? Well, that gets really tricky. There has to be an understanding of what the content is, not just the surface words. So we can kind of do it at the word by word or the phrase by phrase level, but when we're thinking about the real underlying content translation, if that's what's needed, we're a long way off on that.
That was a very good question. Unfortunately, our time has run out, but I hope you will join me in thanking the panelists. And as you will kind of get online, you'll be able to see their bios and stuff. Feel free to reach out to them. I think some of them or all of them are going to be sticking around a little bit. So I hope you will take the time to get to know them a little bit. And I hope this little kind of taste, this conversation was helpful. Thank you.
This was super fun, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really feel passionate about sharing the San Diego talent, elevating San Diego, because it is the best place to be an entrepreneur.